Okay, so the first style we're looking at is going to be a letter. So we know it's going to be informal style of letter that the candidate is being asked to write. So it's about finding that friendly tone like you would with someone you know quite well. Especially because if we look at the topic, you recently received a letter from a friend asking for advice. Okay, so this is someone you know quite well. They've written to you. They said something like, you know, hey Bob, I'm having to make a difficult decision. I want to go to college, but then I'm also worried and I wonder whether I should just get a job instead. Can you help me out? Okay, so when you're writing a letter, the sort of key in these things is trying to find the correct tone when you're writing. And it's quite difficult to find the tone if you're not a native speaker, but there's several things that sort of make up tone. So part of it is vocabulary, about knowing about which vocabulary is used in friendly informal writing and which vocabulary is used in more formal situations. And the second part of it is about the content, about what would be appropriate content if you were really writing to a friend versus what would be appropriate content if you're writing to a more formal person or in a more formal situation. So this is actually quite a nice topic that they've given. I think that there's quite a lot to say here potentially in a letter. So you recently received a letter from a friend asking for advice about whether to go to college or to try to get a job. Okay, then they've given you your opinions. They made it even easier for you. You think they should get a job. Okay, so this is what you're arguing. Getting a job is better than going to college. Okay, so in your letter, they've given you the 3 points to cover. So say why they would not enjoy going to college, so the downsides of college. Explain why getting a job is a good idea for them, so the benefits to them of having a job. And then thirdly, suggest types of jobs that would be suitable for them. Okay, so then they want you to give them some suggestions about what kind of jobs they should apply for. So there's a lot of scope in this letter, and I think there's a lot of topics and information you could talk about. So I think it's actually quite a nice topic to get in the IELTS exam. I think sometimes the letter topics they give, it's quite difficult to think of things to possibly talk about or things to include, but there's actually quite a lot going on here. So if I was going for informal, you want to sort of hit that sort of friendly and positive, okay? Because this is a friend who's come to you asking for advice. So your response should be sort of warm and encouraging because you're trying to help someone out. So you don't want to have sentences that are too like short or abrupt or rude almost to your friend because you're trying to encourage them and help them out in a situation. So you want to use sort of suggestive language in terms of have you sort of things like, you know, have you thought about have you thought about going into accountancy? Have you thought about going into teaching? Because I know you love children. So giving something like a suggestion like that, it's a sort of more friendly, more encouraging way of saying something to a friend rather than, I think you should get a job as an accountant. You know, that's quite strict and it's a little bit unfriendly. So for this kind of thing where you're giving advice, it's trying to sort of use that suggestive language. Have you thought about this? Or, in my opinion, maybe you should try. Okay, so it's these keywords, should try, maybe here, and this is very key because you're saying, well, I don't know, I'm not telling you what to do. In my opinion, I'm giving you advice. In my opinion, maybe you should try applying to jobs first, and then if you don't like them, applying to college later. Okay, so this is the kind of language I would want to see in this letter in terms of being encouraging and friendly, and trying to hit that specific tone. So I think something a lot of candidates might do in this situation is sort of write like an instruction. I don't think you should go to college because A, B, C. I think you should get a job as a teacher because ABC, which is, it has like a rude feeling in English and is not the kind of thing you would actually write if you were giving suggestions to a friend. So that's good. You could, you know, my suggestion, that's another good phrase to use. My suggestion would be to, okay, whoop. My suggestion would be to, you know, do something. So this kind of language, this kind of cautious language, suggestions, maybe, you know, you could, you should, perhaps, you can. That's how you sort of get this advice-giving tone in your letter. So that's something I would want to see from this response. And then we've actually got how to start. So they've given you dear, you know, the name of whoever you're writing to here as a suggestion. But they've even given you the suggestion for what you can include as your introduction. So the first thing, you received a letter from a friend asking for advice. Okay, so that sort of, you know, nicely links into your response, which would be, you know, something like, thanks so much for your letter. Of course, I'm happy to give some advice, or something like that, you know? So that's they've even sort of given you your opening. So you, like you would naturally do, is you would then respond to the fact that they've initially sent you a letter. So you would respond with, oh, you know, dear Charlie, thanks so much for your letter. Of course, I'm happy to give some advice, you know? So that's what I would kind of be looking for to sort of hit that natural kind of letter tone, okay? So of course, for task achievement, you've got to be talking about giving your opinions. They've told you you think jobs are better, and they've given you the 3 sort of sections of your letter to go through. I generally find it better in these letters things and sort of easier for candidates to actually just write your letter in the 3 chunks like they've explained. So follow the pattern, you know, 1, 2, 3. It's sort of safe and it's easier, and then you're very clear when you check through at the end that you know that you fully answered the task in hand. Okay, so now we've sort of looked a bit at the task, we've thought a bit about the tone. Let's have a look and see what this candidate has written. It's got, dear John, how have you been lately? Okay, that's a very good introduction. How have you been lately? It has a sort of that friendly, informal tone we're looking for. So you can say, how have you been lately? You can say something like, how's it going? What's been happening to you recently? You know, how have you been feeling? That kind of thing. How have you been lately? I think naturally I would say, like, how's it going? Or how's it been? Would be how I would naturally write it. But how have you been lately? That's very good, very natural, and it has the correct tone. So off to a good start. I hope you and your family are fine. Okay, no problem. Also a good introduction. As always, I wanted to give you some advice on your future plan. I hope that a few of these tips are useful to you. I'm not sure about this sort of, as always, I wanted to give you some advice on your future plan. I guess maybe, I suppose you could be a friend that he always comes to for advice, but as always, it sounds a bit like a teacher or a lecturer. As always, I wanted to give you some advice on your future plan. I think as a sentence, it's okay. If I'm being very picky about tone, for me, this comes across as too strict and too much like a teacher. You know, as always, I wanted to give you some advice on your future plan. I would suggest, if we were going to improve this sentence, to do something like I suggested on the previous page, which would be something like, as always, I'm happy to give you some advice on your future, or give you some advice about your future plan or about your next steps. Okay, is slightly more informal than future plan. And I think it has that feeling of, like, rather than saying I'm going to give you advice about your future plan, about all the plan for your entire future, I'm happy to give you some advice about your next steps. So again, next steps, it's more immediate. It's like the next couple of decisions, the next couple of years. So it's a bit friendlier than saying I'm going to give you advice about your entire future life. So I think by including something like here where we're saying I'm happy to do something, it's suggesting that you've been asked to. So he said, can you give me advice? And your response is, I'm happy to give you some advice. So the indication in I'm happy to is that you're answering a question. You're responding to what they've asked you to do. Well, when we say I wanted to give you some advice, the feeling of this is that they did not ask you, okay? It's your idea you just decided to write to them and tell them advice, okay? So in this kind of tone we're going to, so like we talked about before, that sort of friendly, encouraging tone, it's more friendly to say, as always, I'm happy to give you some advice, rather than, as always, I wanted to give you some advice. Because when we say, I wanted to give you some advice, the suggestion is, I'm coming up to you, you didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you what I think, okay? Which has got a slightly rude connotation in English, okay? So overall, this sentence, as always, I wanted to give you some advice on your future plan. It's okay, but then I've got some suggestions here for how I would improve it, so sort of going for those higher bands and that sort of that tone that we're going for. All right, and then they say, I hope that a few of these tips are useful to you. Okay, I quite like the use of tips. I think that's good. I have no problems with the sentence. I hope that. So again, it's that sort of suggestive language that we're going for. I hope that a few of these tips are useful for you. It's politer and more friendly to say that than I know that a few of these tips are useful to you, or these tips will be useful to you. Okay, that's a little bit too strong. So again, this candidate is using sort of the hope to make it friendlier and more encouraging in tone. Okay, so let's look at the next paragraph. If you go to college, you would feel that the knowledge you can learn from college doesn't help you to get a better job. Okay, so if you go to college, you would feel that the knowledge you can learn from college doesn't help you to get a better job. Okay, so given what we previously said about tone and about being friendly, encouraging, and giving suggestions, do you feel that using the you would feel college doesn't help you is in line with that tone, or do you feel like it's different from the tone we're going for? So in my opinion, these words are not in the correct tone because it's being, again, too strict and too forceful, okay? It's exactly the same as we just contrasted I wanted to and I'm happy to, okay? So saying we don't know how our friend is going to feel, and it's not really very friendly to tell someone you're going to feel this, you're going to feel that, okay? So I would suggest to keep in that sort of friendly tone. You want to be more cautious. If you go to college, you might feel, or you would say something like, you know, in my experience, many people feel, okay? You could feel, something like that. It's sort of, you're being, rather than will, it's sort of can. So if you go to college, you might feel that the knowledge you learn from college doesn't help you get a better job, okay? Or even sort of slightly more advanced would be the in my experience one, okay? Because now I'm saying, listen, I'm going to tell you what I believe. It's only based on my experience, okay? Because we don't know 100% of people from college don't feel that it was useless. You know what I mean? It depends. If you're going to go do like a medical degree to be a doctor, I don't think many doctors think that their degree was totally useless. So again, we're going for this encouraging suggestions and that kind of tone of giving suggestions to someone. If you go to college, so this is good. If you go to college, in my experience, many people feel that the knowledge you learn from college doesn't actually help, doesn't always help, would be, again, make this sort of softer and more friendly. The knowledge that you gain from college, we could change this to doesn't, to might not, or may not help you to get a better job, okay? So if we, just by sort of tweaking the sentence slightly like that, all of a sudden the feeling of the sentence is, again, that encouraging, advice-giving suggestions, okay? So one thing I'm already thinking when I'm reading this letter is this candidate has reasonably good vocabulary, a good understanding of what the question asked them to do, but what they really needed to have done was practice advice giving English more, okay? Or practice that advice giving tone more. So this sentence, if I was going to rewrite the sentence, it would be, if you go to college, in my experience, many people feel that the knowledge you learn from college might not help you to get a better job. Okay? Tuition is another concern. Okay, this is fine. I like how we're including more topics. Tuition, that's a good specific word to this topic. It's specifically to do with going to college. You should spend a huge amount of money to graduate from college. Therefore, you will use up all of the money you've saved so far. Okay, again, do we know what I'm going to say about this sentence in terms of the words I've underlined? Again, it's too authoritative, too pushy in this tone of giving advice. Okay, so I would suggest that these words need to be softened. You may spend a huge amount of money to graduate from college, and therefore you may, or you might, use up all of the money you've saved so far. Okay, so again, you don't know really as a friend how much money or which college or how much money he's planning to spend. So you want to make this language softer. You may spend a huge amount of money to graduate from college, and therefore you might use up all of the money you've saved so far. Okay, and then if I was going to add a little bit more, I would then link this back to the better job and say something like, and even if you spend all the money you've saved so far, you might not then get a higher paying job as a result. Or many of my friends graduated from college with a lot of student debt. So that would be a good vocabulary word to throw in here. With a lot of student debt, but the job they got after they graduated didn't pay more than the job they had before they went to college. Okay. Another thing you can do to sort of soften the tone and sort of sound more advicey would be to add something for the tuition is another concern, would be to ask a question. Have you thought about how you will pay tuition? Okay, so again, it's by framing it as a question. Have you thought about how you'll pay tuition? It's softer, it's friendlier, and it's more in tone with giving advice. Okay, the tuition is another concern is fine, but again, if I was going to be picky and offer more suggestions for improvement, I would suggest reframing that as a question, just to get that kind of advice-giving tone. Okay, but I mean, so far in terms of grammar, the grammar is reasonably good. There was only sort of one or two minor things that I would change. The vocabulary is reasonably good, communication is fine, and they're clearly answering the question. Okay, so far, okay. I just kind of want to see this cautious vocabulary more. So we move on to section 2. Since you like to amass wealth, I bet getting employment would be a great option for you. Okay. Moreover, there are various job postings recently. You, therefore, can get a job without putting in much effort. Okay, so I think this paragraph is weaker than the previous two paragraphs. The first thing I'm going to talk about is this phrase, amass wealth. Since you like to amass wealth. The word, this amass wealth, actually in English has quite a negative connotation or a negative feeling to it. So you would say it to something like, there are so many poor people in the world because the richest 1% like to amass wealth, or a dragon amasses wealth, or an evil CEO amasses wealth. Like, it's this idea that a mass of wealth is, more wealth than you actually need. So it has a negative feeling. So if I said that to my friend, you like to amass wealth, it's almost like I'm being rude to them, because I'm sort of suggesting you're greedy, you don't give to charity, you have more money than you need. Okay, so a much sort of friendlier or kinder way to frame this would be something like, since you are always conscious about money would be something good. Like, if you're conscious about money, it just means that you're careful with it, or you're always thinking about it, or you're very money literate or money savvy. So some people don't think about money very often, like me, and some people are conscious about money. So that would be a much kinder way, a much friendlier way to say you're often careful about how you spend your money. So, and this is like, you're saying because they're your friend, you know this about them. Since you're always conscious about money, or since you're always, careful about your finances, okay, would be a much sort of kinder way to frame this. Then the second part, so it'd be, since you are careful about your finances, I bet getting employment would be a great option for you. I think I bet it's a nice phrase. Again, we're going to talk about this sort of tone. I bet getting employment would be a great option for you. I kind of want to keep I bet because I think that's actually a nice phrase. It's very natural. It's something a native speaker would say. I bet getting employment could be a great option for you. Okay, so again, just by changing that one word in that phrase, we've suddenly turned it from a direct, like, imperative to a suggestion, which is again what we're going for. Since you're always conscious about money, I bet getting employment could be a great option for you. Moreover, there are various job postings recently. Various job postings. I know a lot of candidates like this word various. It always comes up in the IELTS essays I mark. There are various job postings. Korea has various places to visit. There's various foods you can enjoy. I find various, it's too vague and it's not specific enough. I think in this kind of informal tone of a letter, rather than saying there are various job postings recently, I think I would rephrase it as, moreover, there have been tons of job postings recently. Okay, so all of a sudden we've got new grammar we've been introducing. We've now got informal vocabulary, tons of job postings recently. Okay, so tons of that's the kind of informal language I would use in the letter talking to my friend. They say, you therefore can get a job without putting in much effort. This therefore here is awkwardly placed, and its use here, it has a very formal academic feeling to it. So I would move that here, and I would just connect these two sentences into a much longer sentence. Moreover, there have been tons of job postings recently, therefore you can get a job without putting in much effort. Okay, so I would link these sentences all into one longer sentence rather than chopping it up into these two weird short sentences. So yeah, so I would do that. I quite like the putting in much effort because I think that's quite natural, quite a nice natural phrase to use. Okay, so then we move on to, I know that you're good at calculating and analyzing. I suggest you work in the field of accounting. Yeah. The only thing I would add here is I would just say as I know that you're good at calculating and analyzing, I suggest you work in the field of accounting. Yeah, so you've got the suggest here, okay? So again, this is a sort of more cautious language. If we were going to improve that, I would add I would suggest, or I might suggest you work in the field of accounting. So again, we're sort of, the more of these words we add in between I and suggest, you're backing away from telling someone what to do, and that's how you get a slightly more friendly tone. I might suggest you work in the field of accounting. What about cooking? I quite like this sentence. What about cooking? Like, that's a nice, natural, sort of informal kind of sentence. You're into making cookies as well. I know you will do your best at whatever you choose to do. What about cooking? I would like to see this expanded a little bit more. I think these two suggestions, they're kind of on opposite ends, right? You should either be an accountant or you should open a bakery. So I would just want to see, in terms of content, this expanded a little bit more. So you can add here, or what about cooking? I know You're into making cookies as well. So I would maybe suggest as like, I know you always talked about opening a bakery. Okay, so again, you have always, we're including more grammar, more different tenses, something like that. Rather than saying you're into making cookies, what about cooking? Well, for a start, you know, cookies, you bake a cookie, you cook dinner. So they're slightly different things. And so if you change that to something like, what about baking? You've always talked about opening a bakery or something. I know you're into cookies. You've always talked about opening a bakery. That would give me a little bit more detail, and that would make it sound a little bit more natural. Okay, so that's the sort of suggestion I would make here in terms of content and what content they're including. I like this final sentence. I know you will do your best at whatever you do. The only thing I would want to do is I would want to add something in just to sort of, again, make it more sort of friendly. Something like, of course, these are just my suggestions. And I know you will do your best at whatever you do. Okay? So again, we're softening it down from, I know you will do your best at whatever you choose to do. It's fine. And then we're going to make it softer again by backing away from what we've said. Of course, these are just my suggestions, and I know you will do your best at whatever you choose to do. So again, we're being a little bit more cautious, and it's creating this friendly tone. Because even though they're your friend, and you might have a friendship where you might be able to say things to them very directly, don't go to college, you should become an accountant. In this thing of they're asking for advice, and again, it's in the tone of giving advice, you always want to be cautious about what you're saying, because otherwise you come across too arrogant and too rude. So again, it's always about backing away from giving them a direct instruction by trying to make it slightly more indirect, what you're saying to them. And then he finishes the letter by saying, thank you, please let me know either you choose college or job. So thank you, please let me know either way if you choose or if you decide on college or a job. Okay, so I think that's probably one of the weakest sentences in the whole thing. I think that's the first sentence where I've been like, okay, well, that's sounds like there are significant grammar issues, but the rest of it was relatively good. Best wishes, Noah. So I like ending with best wishes. I think that's fine. So I think overall, I think there's a lot of positives to what this candidate has written. I think they completed the task achievement well. They covered everything they were asked to do. They gave the sort of pros of going to college. The negatives of going to college, the pros of getting a job right now. The main issues were, like we talked about a lot, their tone was a little bit too strict or a little bit too forceful. And there was one or two instances of their vocabulary not quite being appropriate. And then we had this one sentence that was weaker in terms of grammar. So in terms of task achievement, I thought this was good task achievement. I would want to give a sort of, I guess, a 6.5 in terms of task achievement. Again, we're then pushing up into these higher bands. I would want to see this cautious language more. Coherence and cohesion, I thought worked well. I would want to give I'd probably give a 6.5 for coherence and cohesion. For vocabulary, I would want to give a 6, just because of those two instances. It's quite a short letter, so those two times where the amass wealth and cooking and making cookies, various job postings, is kind of like stick out more because it's slightly, shorter. And then under vocabulary, I'd want to sort of put in these, not using enough cautious language and cautious vocabulary. And then also in terms of grammar, I would probably give a 6, just because I thought there were some instances where they could have linked their sentences together more, like I sort of pointed out here, to create some slightly longer phrases. I thought some of their sentences were quite short. So for example, we see here in the introduction, we've got 4 quite short, simple sentences, and I have liked to have seen them link them together and be a little bit more expressive. And then also I thought there were quite a few opportunities where they could have used more complicated tenses to talk to their friend, and they didn't take the opportunity. So that's what I would want to see. Things like, oh, I know you have been saving up to buy a house for the past 15 years. I wouldn't want to see you risk that on a college, spend all that money on a college degree. Or I know you and your wife have been trying to have a baby now for 2 years, and please, I would suggest that you carefully consider whether you can afford both to go to college and raise a baby at the same time. So in terms of grammar, I thought there were chances that this candidate had to improve the complexity of the grammar they were using. They didn't quite show me their range and their skill, but what they wrote was quite clear, quite easy to follow, and reasonably direct. I think overall, probably like in the actual thing, I can see how someone would say a 6.5. I would want to give this a sort of, my feeling is this is kind of a 6.0 overall. I know, you do the average, probably they round up to a 6.5, but my feeling is this is a solid 6, and that's mainly to do, like I keep saying, with the tone of the letter. I think a couple of these minor changes in tone that I talked about would definitely bump this letter up into a 6.5 or a 7 if they were just slightly more cautious about it. In my heart of hearts, I don't feel it's a 6.5 quite yet, but it's very close. So that's why overall I would want to say 6. And then maybe have some sort of debate, or checking with another examiner about whether they thought this was worthy of staying at a 6.5 or whether it would bump down to a 6. But my feeling is this is right now is a standard of a 6.0 standard. And I would definitely tell this candidate to practice more on their tone and their advice giving to improve. But I think it was a good structure, clearly written, easy to understand, good task completion.